The sound of heavy boots echoed through the quiet early morning hallway. Ji-young stood at the entrance of his home, still struggling to believe what he was seeing. There, standing as confidently as ever, was Gai-seng's uncle, his guardian, and now his supposed father for a day, dressed like he had just walked off the set of a gangster movie from the 1980s. A crimson silk shirt, slightly wrinkled and aggressively shiny, clung to his chest like a badge of honor. A pair of black slacks sat tight and high on his waist, cinched with a gold-buckled belt. His neck shimmered with multiple chains that clinked with each movement, and his face, partially covered by dark sunglasses, wore a smile far too smug for a man about to meet a school principal. Ji-young's heart sank. This was going to be a disaster. As they walked toward the school together, Ji-young did everything he could to make his uncle blend in. He asked him to wear a jacket. Guy refused. He suggested they take a longer route to avoid being seen by students. Guy took the main gate instead. The second they entered school grounds, heads turned. Students whispered. Teachers stared. Some backed away instinctively. Ji-young felt like his lungs were caving in from the pressure, but Gai-seng, he thrived in it. He walked like he owned the place, like every stare was a compliment. His very presence unsettled people. He stopped once to admire a vending machine, squinting at it like it was a foreign invention, then chuckled as if the world itself amused him. In the teacher's office, the mood was drastically different. The lead teacher stood with arms crossed, flanked by two other faculty members. They had expected Ji-young's father, a quiet, gentle man, like the student they used to know. Instead, they were met with a man who radiated authority and danger, Mr. Kang. One teacher asked tentatively. Guy smiled, slowly removing his sunglasses. The one and only. The meeting began. At first, it was formal. The teachers voiced their concerns, the change in Ji-young's behavior, his clothing, the rumors of intimidation. They spoke of how he no longer greeted others, how his demeanor scared the other students. They even mentioned complaints from other parents. Guy nodded politely at first, but his tone sharpened as he responded, defending Ji-young as someone under his guidance and protection. He didn't yell, he didn't threaten, but every word he spoke carried a weight that made the teachers uneasy. Ji-young sat in silence the whole time, torn between fear and fascination. He had always known his family had power, but watching that power bend a room of authority figures without a single curse or raised voice, that changed something in him. He began to understand why people feared them, and maybe, in a small way, why they respected them too. Eventually, the meeting ended abruptly and awkwardly. The teachers, unsure of how to handle the situation further, allowed Ji-young to return to class, but with a warning. Later that day, Ji-young walked through the corridors alone. The image of Gai-seng in the teacher's office played over in his mind. Like a loop, his confidence, his ability to turn a room in his favor was everything Ji-young had tried and failed to mimic. And yet, something inside him still resisted. That resistance was shaken further when he passed by a window and saw Sujin. She was laughing, smiling. Chin was beside her, his arm casually thrown over her shoulder. She didn't push him away. Her face was full of light, the kind of light Ji-young once believed was reserved only for good people. But now she shared it with someone like him. Ji-young looked away, shame and frustration boiling in his stomach. I'm still not enough, he thought. Not bad enough. Not cool enough. Not strong enough. As he turned the next corner, something caught his attention. Down the hallway, a commotion stirred. A group of students stood around, watching something with half-interested expressions. Ji-young moved closer. What he saw shocked him. A smaller student, frail and trembling, stood cornered. But the one doing the bullying wasn't a thug. It was the GI, flanked by two other girls, wearing mischievous smirks. They were teasing the boy, not physically, but with cruel words and mockery that hit just as hard. For a moment, Ji-young stood frozen. Then something shifted. He stepped forward, not to defend the boy, but to act. This was his chance. He thought, his chance to be the kind of bad he'd been trying so hard to imitate. He forced his expression blank, stepped between them, and turned to the boy. "Give me your money," Ji-young said, his voice low and awkward, "or I'll kill you." The words came out stiff and wrong. His body didn't fully commit. His eyes twitched with hesitation, but the boy, already scared, reached into his pocket and handed him some bills. The G watched, stunned. She hadn't expected that. No one had. Ji-young, the former model student, now fully immersed himself in this persona, one that made even her, the usual ice queen, frown. He walked away with the money, trying to wear pride on his face. Inside, he felt sick. Behind him, Gai-seng emerged from the shadows again. He had followed Ji-young after the meeting, unsure if the boy would fall or rise. He saw what happened and smiled to him. This was progress. He didn't care that the act had been shaky, or that Ji-young's eyes still glistened with doubt. All that mattered was intent. Ji-young had taken something from someone weaker, the first step of a true gangster. But not everyone saw it that way. The Ji stared at Ji-young's back as he walked away. There was no admiration in her eyes, only confusion, betrayal, and something colder. The morning air was crisp, but Ji-young's heart was anything but calm. Beside him walked his uncle, Gai Sang, who carried himself with the confidence of someone used to commanding respect, not asking for it. On the way to school, Gai Sang had asked, casually about Ji-young's daily life, what he learned, how he felt walking among normals, and whether any girls had taken an interest in him yet. It was half joking, half sincere, but Ji-young struggled to answer. His thoughts were clouded, not by the questions, but by what lay ahead. As they passed neighborhoods and shop fronts, people's eyes widened, workers bowed subtly, street vendors offered respectful nods. Even the loitering teens straightened up. The moment they caught sight of Gai Sang's unmistakable figure, he was known, feared, respected. Gai Sang didn't bask in the recognition, but he acknowledged every gesture as naturally as breathing. Ji-young tried to walk like him, shoulders broad, posture relaxed, eyes sharp, but his steps betrayed him. He was forcing it, and he knew it. Still, he kept going. At the school gates, whispers erupted like sparks on dry grass. Ji-young had arrived. With a gangster. Students froze mid-step, turning to watch the unlikely duo march in. Some covered their mouths in shock. Others whispered with nervous curiosity. A few even stepped back, instinctively clearing a path. But it wasn't Uncle Gai Sang. They were reacting to it. Was Ji-young transformed? It wasn't his clothes, it was the aura. The weight of someone carrying something darker. Ji-young ignored the stares as best he could, cheeks burning with quiet shame, not because of Gai Sang, but because he was trying so hard to become someone else. He motioned quickly for his uncle to go ahead to the teacher's office and parted ways in the hallway. Inside the school, a quiet storm was brewing in the faculty room. The teachers were already unsettled by Ji-young's recent behavioral shift, but none of them were prepared for the man who now entered the room. Gai Sang's presence stopped every conversation cold. His clothes were loud, his eyes sharp. His very walk said, "I don't follow your rules, I make my own." Whispers passed between teachers like wind through dry leaves. One leaned toward another and muttered cautiously, "Should we call the police?" Another just kept wiping sweat from his brow, clearly regretting ever getting involved, but the head teacher known as Chief straightened his spine and rose. Determined to stay professional, with a decade of experience, he wasn't going to be intimidated, at least not openly. He offered a polite greeting and motioned toward the consultation room, pretending not to notice the tension in the air. To his credit, Chief even brewed tea himself and served it with both hands, careful not to offend. Gai Sang received the cup calmly and sat down, legs slightly apart, back resting comfortably, like a man who had nothing to prove. The conversation began. Chief cleared his throat and explained, "We've asked you here today because Ji-young seems to be going through some difficulties. He's changed, and not for the better." Gai Sang tilted his head slightly. "Difficulties," he repeated, his voice low. His expression darkened, not with anger, but something more serious. The kind of focus that made men hesitate. "Do you mean real trouble?" he asked. Chief quickly clarified, "No, not that kind of trouble. Ji-young wasn't caught fighting or stealing, just acting different, dressing strangely, behaving more rudely, intimidating students without meaning to." Gai Sang nodded silently, as if processing. Then his tone sharpened. "Are there any students here who extort or bully others?" he asked. Chief froze for a moment, flustered. "Of course not," he replied quickly. "Our school maintains strict standards. We don't tolerate that kind of behavior." But Gai Sang's eyes narrowed. He wasn't convinced. As he left the consultation room, something bothered him deeply. He replayed the scene from a few days ago in his mind when he had secretly followed Ji-young and seen him interact with a specific student, one who acted like a predator, one who had that aura, that boy, Shin. Gai Sang paused in the hallway, eyes scanning students as they passed. He wasn't sure yet who Shin was, but he would find him. He wasn't going to let this slide. If his nephew was being dragged into something dark, if the school was lying about its clean image, then Gai Sang would be the one to uncover the truth. He adjusted his jacket, his knuckles cracking slightly. It was no longer just about Ji-young behaving better or worse. It was about protecting him from those who had already made the descent into something far worse. Asterisk. The hallway felt unusually quiet, as though the school itself was holding its breath. Ji-young stood in front of the restroom mirror, staring at his reflection. The boy looking back at him was unrecognizable. Not because of the new way he styled his hair, or the heavy necklace around his neck, or even the fake swagger in his stance, but because of the turmoil hidden behind his eyes. The call from his uncle had left him rattled. The words weren't particularly cruel. In fact, they were spoken with the same casual tone Guy always used. But it was the expectation they carried that disturbed Ji-young. The idea that violence wasn't just permitted now, it was expected of him, demanded even, and worse, it was supposed to make him feel proud. Outside, the school continued its day as usual. Students laughed, argued, rushed to class, scribbled in notebooks. But for Ji-young, time had slowed into a thick, syrupy drag. His thoughts were interrupted by the appearance of Sang-gyu. The boy still carried the same timid posture, the same haunted look in his eyes from yesterday. He wasn't a threat, not even close. In another life, Ji-young might have sat next to him during lunch, maybe even helped him with his homework. But here, in this version of himself, Sang-gyu represented a challenge, a test. Ji-young took a step forward. His body moved almost mechanically. In his mind, he tried to summon the voices of his uncle's stuff, commanding, proud. They told him this was the moment where he could truly prove he was one of them. He clenched his fist. It felt unfamiliar in his hand, like a foreign object. Heavy, even though it was empty. A punch, they had told him, would change everything. It would make the teachers stop questioning him. It would make other students fear him. It would solidify his place as the rightful heir of a gangster legacy. But standing in front of Sang-gyu, whose hands trembled as he waited not for pain, but for something he believed would not come, Ji-young felt no pride, no adrenaline, no power, only shame. The boy hadn't even tried to defend himself. He had simply walked forward, believing Ji-young would do the right thing, and that belief burned more than any insult ever could. Ji-young raised his fist higher. He could feel the tension in his muscles, the way his stomach twisted, the pounding in his chest, the weight of 100 eyes he couldn't see, but could feel his uncles, his classmates, his past self, and his future all watching. He remained like that for a long moment, fist raised, decision frozen. It was then he realized something terrifying. Becoming bad wasn't just about doing terrible things, it was about silencing the part of yourself that knew better. And Ji-young couldn't do that, not yet. Not to this boy, not to himself. Slowly, the fist dropped back to his side. He didn't speak. He didn't explain. He simply turned his back and walked away. Outside the restroom, the school buzzed on. Unbeknownst to him, Guy Sang had already left the school grounds. Disappointed he couldn't teach Shin a lesson, but reassured that Ji-young was making progress after seeing him extort someone the day before. What Guy didn't know, what no one knew, was that Ji-young's conscience wasn't gone. It was buried, struggling, still fighting to breathe beneath the image she was building. Elsewhere, Shin was still planning how to sell the expensive-looking ring he had stolen. He thought he was just making easy money. He didn't know the item carried more than sentimental value. It carried the attention of very dangerous people. And in another part of the school, the Ji sat silently, staring out the window. Her mind drifted back to Ji-young. She couldn't shake the memory of his trembling fist or the guilt in his eyes. She had seen his hesitation. It was brief, but it was enough. Enough to tell her that, deep down, Ji-young was still fighting to remain good in a world that wanted him bad. That afternoon, the household prepared something unexpected. A party. Not for honor, not for celebration of an achievement, but for Ji-young's official first steps toward being one of them. Decorations went up. Alcohol was poured. Music blared. Each of his uncles argued over who would teach him next how to interrogate, how to manipulate out of control. But none of them saw the truth, that Ji-young hadn't crossed the line yet. He had simply approached it, stared at it, and recoiled. And as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Ji-young sat alone in his room, surrounded by silence, torn between the boy he once was and the man the world now demanded him to become. The restroom was silent, yet the tension in the air felt deafening. Ji-young stood rigid, his hand still gripping Sang-gyu's collar. The boy trembled beneath his grasp, eyes wide with confusion and fear. It was the first time Ji-young had ever seen someone look at him like that, not with admiration, or trust, or even concern, but pure terror. He told himself this was the moment. His debut, as someone feared, someone ruthless. It was what his uncles wanted. It was what his image demanded. But no matter how many times he replayed their advice in his head, no matter how many reasons he gathered to justify the act, his fist refused to move. Sang-gyu, helpless, looked past Ji-young and called for help, his voice weak, cracking. Song. Jung-seok was still in the restroom, leaning against the sink with a towel around his neck, just watching. His presence alone kept Ji-young frozen. Ji-young couldn't bring himself to strike someone when someone like Song was watching. It would feel too real, too final. Eventually, Song gave Ji-young a blank, unreadable look, then simply turned and walked out. Ji-young stood there, breathing heavily, sweat trailing down his back. The room suddenly felt colder, the tile beneath his shoes harder, and yet, even now with no one watching, he still couldn't do it. His grip loosened. Sang-gyu stumbled back, unsure whether to thank him or run, so he chose the latter. As he fled the restroom, his words echoed behind him like a curse. "You're not an angel anymore. You're a demon." The words should have made Ji-young proud. He had done what was expected. He had terrified someone. But instead, he stood alone in the restroom, feeling like something inside him had cracked. Not from violence, but from how close he had come to abandoning the last shred of himself. He leaned against the sink, staring into the mirror again. The boy looking back now was worse than unrecognizable. He was unsure of his own reflection. His Uncle Hung's voice echoed in his mind like a warning. "If you choose to become bad, there's no going back. Everything you've built, everything you've protected, will vanish like bubbles in the wind." And then came the image of Soo-jin. The one reason he had tried to be good, but even she had changed. The girl he once admired had chosen someone else, chosen Shin. If she could let go of who Ji-young had been, maybe he could too. Maybe this really was the beginning of something else. When Ji-young returned to class, whispers followed him like shadows. No one believed the rumors, not at first. Ji-young had always been kind, helpful, someone people turned to in silence. That he had threatened someone? It didn't make sense. Even Soo-jin was stunned. Her expression held disbelief, concern, maybe, even a flicker of guilt. Ji-young approached her, his voice calm but distant. He said it plainly, not just, she had changed, but he had too. And perhaps she was beautiful now, more than ever. But beauty didn't erase the gap between who they once were and who they had become. That was when Shin entered the room, his eyes filled with fire, the moment he saw Ji-young talking to his girlfriend. The silence shattered as his fist struck Ji-young's face without warning. Ji-young staggered back. Before he could respond, Shin's gang had swarmed him, grabbing his arms, pinning him down. Each punch that followed was heavier, more personal, as if Shin wasn't just defending his pride, but trying to erase Ji-young entirely. Soo-jin tried to intervene, to stop the assault, but Shin's anger was uncontrollable. He turned toward her, with his hand raised, fury replacing all sense of reason, and that's when Ji-young's voice cracked through the chaos, hoarse, desperate, louder than anything he'd ever shouted. "Stop, you bastard." It was enough to wake the sleeping beast. From the corner of the classroom, Song Jung-seok rose from his seat, as if pulled by the sound. His expression was unreadable, yet his steps were deliberate, slow, almost cold. Everyone froze when he approached. He didn't shout, he didn't warn. He simply looked at Shin and said, with terrifying calmness, "If you lay a hand on Soo-jin, you'll die by mine." The room turned to ice. Shin, ever prideful, tried to laugh it off. Even raised his fist again, this time toward Ji-young, but he never got the chance. Before anyone could blink, Song grabbed Shin by the collar and lifted him from the floor like he weighed nothing. Then came the first punch, swift, brutal, like thunder striking flesh. It echoed through the classroom, louder than gasps or screams. Shin dropped to his knees, clutching his jaw in shock. Song's left hand followed, stronger, faster. A second blow that sent Shin sprawling. The classroom turned into chaos as students backed away, unsure whether to run or stay frozen in place. No one dared to stop him because in that moment, they realized something. The most feared student in school wasn't Shin, it was Song. And Ji-young, still aching, bruised and humiliated, looked up from the floor not with gratitude, but with something else, a realization he would never be like Song, not because he wasn't strong enough, but because deep down, he still didn't want to be feared, not like this. Inside the quiet infirmary, time felt slower. The world outside continued, teachers moving from class to class, students laughing in hallways, but for Ji-young, everything was still. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and old curtains. The room dimly lit by the overcast sky beyond the window. He sat on the edge of the infirmary bed, shoulders slumped, his body aching not only from Shin's punches, but from something much deeper. Guilt had planted itself firmly in his chest, growing like vines, tightening every time he replayed the moment with Sang-ju in the school bathroom. The look on Sang-ju's face, fear, betrayal, confusion, burned itself into Ji-young's mind. Like a brand, he almost hit him. He had really almost done it. And all for what? Approval, to feel stronger, to prove he was worthy of being a gangster's son. The thought made him want to throw up. Song sat nearby, quietly flipping through a medical textbook left behind on a table. He hadn't said much since bringing Gi-young there. He never did. His silence wasn't cold, it was heavy, as if he carried a weight no one else could see. And perhaps that's why Ji-young finally spoke. Why, did you help me? His voice was small, brittle, like a child who had been caught doing something wrong. Song closed the book and looked out the window. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, finally, he answered, "You looked like someone who needed help." No judgment, no moral lesson, just a simple truth. And that truth shook Ji-young more than any scolding ever could. "I almost hit him, Song," Ji-young muttered, his fingers digging into his lap. "A kid who's done nothing to me. I almost turned into someone I hate." He thought of his uncle's words. "Once you choose this path, there's no turning back. Everything you've built as a good person will vanish like a bubble." He thought of Sujin, the reason he once tried so hard to be kind. But now even she had changed, drawn into someone else's orbit. Maybe she had always belonged there. Maybe he had never stood a chance. That made his chest hurt worse than any punch Shin had landed. Meanwhile, outside the school, Shin sat in a back alley, surrounded by his usual gang. His right eye was swollen shut, his pride wounded far more severely. Every time he blinked, he could still see Song's face. Calm, unshaken, unafraid. "That guy," Shin growled, voice thick with rage. "He thinks he's untouchable." His friends sat in awkward silence. They had seen how effortlessly Song had floored Shin. They had felt the fear of standing near him. They weren't ready for another confrontation. "Even if it's 3-on-1, we'll lose," one of them muttered. But Shin wasn't listening. His thoughts had already drifted to the people he knew outside school, the kind of people who didn't ask questions, who didn't fight fair. He had connections, favors owed. If fists weren't enough to take Song down, maybe something dirtier would do the job, and he was willing to go that far. Elsewhere. In the school cafeteria, the G sat at the edge of her seat, picking nervously at her food while glancing over at Ji-young's usual table, but he wasn't there. The rumors had already started, spreading Ji-young had been beaten up by Shin. Some said he fought back. Others claimed he cried. The G tried to mask her concern, but it showed. One of Ji-young's friends noticed. "You're acting weird," he said with a teasing smile. "You like him, don't you?" The G rolled her eyes, but her cheeks flushed. She tried to deflect, asking casual questions about Ji on what kind of girl he liked, what food he enjoyed, but the more she asked, the more confused she became. His friends gave vague answers, and one even thought she was interested in him instead. Frustrated, she finally blurted, "Do any of you even know what kind of girl Ji-young likes?" They shrugged. "He's not the type to talk about that." Still, one of them mentioned his favorite snack, a small thing, but enough for the G to cling to. Maybe it was silly, but buying that snack and giving it to him felt like a way to say what she couldn't put into words. Like maybe, through that tiny gesture, she could start to fix things between them. With the snack in hand, the G headed back toward class when she heard the rumor. Ji-young was in the infirmary, her breath caught in her throat. She didn't think. She just ran. The halls blurred around her. Her shoes echoed against the linoleum. Her heart raced faster than her feet. She didn't stop until she reached the infirmary door. She burst in, panting, eyes wide with panic, and found Ji-young sitting on the bed, bruised, exhausted, and crying. The sight stopped her in her tracks. Ji-young had always seemed strong in his own way, kind, gentle, never confrontational. Seeing him this broken was like seeing a mirror shatter in slow motion. She didn't know what to say. She didn't even know why she'd run there. But her hands, still holding his favorite snack, trembled. Back in the infirmary, the G finally found her voice. She walked over, offering the snack to Ji-young with trembling fingers. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't need to. "I heard you were hurt," she said, almost in a whisper. Ji-young looked up, surprised. His eyes still red from crying, but her presence, unexpected, sincere, soothed something inside him. Maybe, just maybe, he hadn't lost everything yet. Our story opens with a high school student named Kang Ji-young, who was known around his neighborhood and school as an exceptionally good kid. The kind of student who helps elderly women cross the street, offers assistance without being asked, and always seems to do the right thing. To many, he's the ideal example of kindness. But behind this polished image is a complex truth. One morning, as Ji-young walks to school through a narrow alleyway he uses regularly, he notices something unusual. In the middle of the path, a group of thuggish students, delinquents from his school, are ganging up on someone. A fellow student is being bullied. At first glance, it looks like the usual harassment, but the situation quickly becomes more sinister. It turns out that their true target isn't the boy they're beating, it's Ji-young himself. The bullies confront him directly. They threaten to destroy something valuable to him unless he pays them money. Though nervous, Ji-young doesn't resist. He gives them what they demand without putting up a fight. From an outsider's perspective, it may seem like Ji-young is just a naturally kind person, even brave. But the truth runs deeper. As we come to learn, Ji-young wasn't always this way. His kindness isn't innate, something he works at every single day. It's an act of discipline, of performance. He tries to be good, almost obsessively, not because it's in his heart, but because of someone, Soo-jin, a beautiful classmate he's admired for years. Upon arriving at class, Ji-young enters with a warm smile and a cheerful greeting. "Good morning," he says brightly to the students. Around him, among them is a striking girl with long brown hair. She smiles back and says, "Hi Ji-young, good morning." Her name is Soo-jin. This moment of warmth is familiar part of a daily routine that Ji-young has created to maintain his good image, especially in front of her. Not long after, rumors begin circulating in school. Word spreads that Ji-young had helped Sang-ju, the same student who was being bullied in the alley earlier that morning. While the truth is more complicated, Ji-young doesn't deny the story. People see him as a hero, and for now, he lets that image stand. Later that day, while Ji-young and Soo-jin are on cleaning duty together in class, an unexpected thing happens. A delinquent, one of the same bullies from earlier, comes to the door and calls for Soo-jin. Without hesitation, she tells Ji-young to leave first and that she'll catch up later. Something about the situation feels strange. Suspicious, Ji-young decides not to leave. He hides nearby and listens. What he overhears is shocking. There seems to be something romantic going on between Soo-jin and this delinquent. Ji-young's mind reels. The very person he thought he was becoming good for, the girl who once said she wanted to marry a kind man, now spending time with someone entirely the opposite. Ji-young falls into a daze, unable to believe what he's seen and heard. He walks back to class in silence, his thoughts spiraling. After school ends, Soo-jin catches up with him and invites him to walk home together, as they've done many times before. Ji-young agrees, but inside, his mind is churning with questions, confusion, and betrayal. As they walk, he begins to reflect. He remembers a time in the past, a defining moment. Soo-jin once told him that she dreamed of marrying a good person. That single statement had changed his life. It became his motivation, his reason for trying to be good every single day. His kindness, his good manners, his helpful attitude, all of it stemmed from that moment. But now, faced with the sight of Soo-jin being close to a delinquent, everything starts to unravel. Ji-young begins to question everything. Maybe being bad is what really works. Maybe it's not the good guys who win in the end. The thought makes him deeply uncomfortable, but it also begins to reshape his thinking. In a sudden moment of honesty, Ji-young confesses to Soo-jin something he's never told anyone. "I'm not actually a good person," he says. "I come from a family of gangsters. I'm trying hard to be good, but it's not who I really am." Soo-jin, however, doesn't take this seriously. She laughs it off, assuming Ji-young is only pretending to be from a criminal background to help her with whatever trouble she's in. In her eyes, Ji-young is still that nice, reliable, good-hearted guy. Then, without warning, the delinquent reappears. This time, he boldly invites Soo-jin to go on a date with him. She accepts right in front of Ji-young, without a second glance. Soo-jin walks off with the boy, leaving Ji-young behind, alone and stunned. Ji-young stands still as the world around him moves on. At that moment, something breaks inside him. Anger begins to swell, not just at Soo-jin or the delinquent, but at himself for believing that being good would be enough. As he walks home, his expression changes. This is no longer the boy who greeted everyone with a smile. He looks around at his house, no ordinary home, but the headquarters of a gangster family, and in that moment, he makes a vow. He will no longer try to be a good person. After his painful confrontation with reality, after realizing the person he loved no longer matched the ideal he had spent his life pursuing, Ji-young made a choice. He would no longer pretend to be good. The walk home that day was unlike any he'd taken before. No longer carrying the clean posture of a role model student, Ji-young walked with clenched fists and silent fury. His thoughts spun in loops, memories of Soo-jin's laughter, the promise she once spoke about marrying a good man, and the fresh image of her smiling beside the very delinquent he had once pitied. As he stepped into the family estate, a large, intimidating residence surrounded by guards and thick stone walls, He was no longer greeted as a student or son. He was greeted as something more. Young master, welcome home. The guards at the gate, clad in black suits, bowed slightly in deference. Ji-young didn't respond. He didn't even look at them. Where's my uncle? He asked coldly. The guards moved aside silently, without wasting time. Ji-young stormed through the expansive halls, straight to the room where his uncle, his father's right-hand man, seated, mid-phone call. He didn't knock, he didn't wait. He barged in. Help me. His voice was low, sharp. I want to become a bad person. The uncle, a seasoned man, hardened by a life in the underground world, looked up slowly, raising an eyebrow. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, recognition, maybe even pride. For a long time, they had seen Ji-young only as the polite kid, the bright one who was different from his lineage. But in this moment, he resembled someone else entirely. His father, the man who once ruled these halls, a feared and respected gangster, a man whose fists spoke louder than words, a man no one crossed. The uncle closed his phone slowly, stood up, and stepped toward Ji-young. Are you sure? He asked quietly. You've spent 10 years building your life, your reputation as a good person. Are you ready to throw that all away, just like that? Ji-young didn't blink. His eyes were steady. There's no reason left to be good anymore, he replied. His voice didn't waver. His thoughts returned again Soo-jin, the girl he built his entire identity around. Her smile, her belief in kindness, and the cruel image of her holding hands with a thug, brushing off Ji-young like he was nothing. His uncle watched him, then finally nodded. All right, if that's your choice, then we'll take care of the rest. You won't have to act alone. From this moment on, we'll teach you everything. The days that followed were a blur. Ji-young's uncles, once passive protectors in his life, now became mentors of something far darker. They taught him how to intimidate, how to posture, how to manipulate. They corrected his behavior, his habits even, his way of walking and standing. Don't greet people first. One uncle said, a good person gives, a bad person makes others give. Another taught, smiles are weaknesses. Silence is control. Each lesson chipped away at the old Ji-young, the smiling, polite student. And every time he hesitated, every time a flicker of doubt crossed his face, he would remember Soo-jin walking away with that delinquent. That was all it took to harden his resolve again. But at night, alone in his bedroom, the transformation was harder to accept. He stared at his walls, lined with certificates, medals, and trophies. Achievements from years of dedication, academic excellence, leadership awards, community service, recognitions. They stared back at him like ghosts of a life he no longer belonged to. He lay on his bed and whispered to himself, can I really become someone else? Can I erase 10 years? Just like that. But his decision was made. The next morning, Ji-young arrived at school, not in his usual clean uniform, but wearing flashy streetwear accessories, and a cold expression that dared anyone to question him. No one had ever seen him like this. And most telling of all, he didn't greet a single person. He walked down the halls where he once chirped cheerful good morning-s. But now, nothing. His lips twitched, his throat itched. His body wanted to greet people. It was a deeply ingrained habit, but he resisted. He had to resist. Confused eyes followed him. Students whispered, is that Ji-young? What happened to him? He looks like a gangster. Even Soo-jin noticed the change. She approached him carefully, brows furrowed. You're acting weird. What's going on with you? Ji-young didn't hesitate. He looked straight into her eyes and replied coldly, I'm not the one who changed first. You were. He said it clearly. A mirror held up to her own actions. She had changed long before he did. She was the one who walked away from their childhood values. She was the one who chose someone else. Later that day, while wandering alone, Ji-young saw something that crushed any lingering doubt. Soo-jin's boyfriend, the same delinquent, skirting school responsibilities, hanging out with multiple girls, laughing with them, touching them, cheating. Ji-young followed quietly and saw the boy take one of the girls to his house. The mood shifted when the girl resisted his advances. Voices rose. A fight broke out between them. Ji-young crouched behind a wall, conflicted. He didn't want to help, but he also couldn't watch silently. In a moment of reckless decision, he picked up a stone and hurled it. The first stone missed. It hit the girl. She screamed, panicking. Ji-young grabbed another stone and threw again, this time hitting the delinquent boyfriend squarely. He staggered, using the distraction. Ji-young rushed in, pulled the girl. After the chaos of the fight and the sudden rescue, Ji-young and the girl he had helped, whose name he soon learned was the Ji, found shelter in a quiet corner of the city. A small bench, half shaded by trees and far from curious eyes, became their momentary refuge. The Ji sat in silence, still catching her breath from the frantic escape. Ji Young, despite his rough new image, went to a nearby shop and bought a box of band-aids. When he returned, he handed them to her and muttered a brief apology. The earlier accident, the first stone that had struck her, still lingered awkwardly between them. As they talked, something unexpected surfaced. The Ji was actually one of Ji Young's classmates, but she didn't recognize him. His transformation had been so drastic, so complete, that he seemed like a stranger. The old Ji Young was gone, hidden behind the cold fashion, the accessories, and the silence. Their conversation turned personal. Ji Young, with a strange mix of bitterness and curiosity, asked whether the Ji also liked bad boys, men like the one she had just escaped, or like Shinjung Sujin's current boyfriend. The question hung heavy. It wasn't just about the Ji opinion, it was Ji Young trying to understand himself. Could he truly become like them? Could he really discard everything he was? Meanwhile, somewhere across town, Shinjung, enraged and confused, returned to the spot where someone had hurled stones at him. He scanned the area and found something evidence. Perhaps that suggested someone had been hiding there. His anger boiled over. Whoever it was, he wouldn't let it go. Back at school, Ji Young and the Ji parted ways with a quiet agreement. What had happened that day must remain a secret. No one could know, not the teachers, not the students. When Ji Young arrived back at school, everything felt slightly different. In the cafeteria, he sat with his usual group of friends, but their conversations were cautious, almost uneasy. They stared at his outfit, his demeanor, the new way he held himself. It was like someone had swapped him overnight. Some whispered questions turned into open concern. Why was he acting like this? Why the sudden change? One of them mentioned how he looked dangerous, even intimidating now. But instead of being offended, Ji Young felt something else: satisfaction. It was working. People were starting to see him not as a harmless student, but as someone not to mess with. Eventually, a teacher summoned him to the faculty room. His clothes alone had drawn attention. The staff wanted answers, but Ji Young didn't explain himself. He let their assumptions grow. During lunch, the Ji surprised everyone by sitting at Ji Young's table. Her presence alone created a stir. Students murmured, wondering what kind of connection she could have with the now rebellious Ji Young. Without prompting, the Ji looked directly at him and asked a question that pierced through the table's tense silence. If he really wanted to be bad, then why had he helped her? It was a question Ji Young didn't answer. Instead, with quiet frustration and rising emotion, he stood up and left the cafeteria. Sujin, sitting not far away, caught sight of him as he walked out. Her eyes followed him not with affection, but confusion. Something about him was unraveling, and she could feel it. As Ji Young returned to his classroom alone, he reached for the accessories he had worn, necklace, rings, and chains, and began to strip them off. But when he touched his fingers, panic hit him. The ring, the one his uncle had given him, a cherished heirloom, was gone. He searched frantically, tearing through his desk drawer, scanning the floor. Nothing. The ring, once passed down from his father, had vanished. Before he could process the loss, Shinjung appeared. Without warning, Shin lashed out. Ji Young was knocked to the ground, kicked several times. His body curled defensively, but there was little he could do. Shin was stronger, wilder, and far more brutal. Just when it seemed the beating would continue, the Ji appeared. She stepped in, defiant, confronting Shin directly. He turned his rage toward her and demanded to know who had helped her escape earlier. His tone was laced with threat, but the Ji didn't flinch. She looked him in the eyes and calmly stated that the person who had helped her was Songjung Suchon Suka, name that carried weight. A man more dangerous than Shin, more feared, more unpredictable. Not a thug, but a genuine menace. Shin's expression froze. With just that name, the Ji had turned the balance of power. Ji Young, still on the floor, watched in stunned silence. He didn't fully understand what the Ji had just done, but for the first time that day, he realized he wasn't alone in the chaos. And yet, somewhere in his heart, something remained unclear. His mask was on, his act was in motion, but deep down, Ji Young still had no idea who was he really trying to become. The classroom still trembled with tension when the name Songjung Suyok was uttered. For a moment, Shinjung's aggressive posture collapsed into visible unease. That name wasn't just a bluff, it carried weight. Everyone knew that Songjung wasn't an ordinary student. He had a reputation built not from rumors, but from cold, undeniable truths. Even when he did nothing, his presence was heavy. Song was asleep at his desk when Shin, still fuming but uncertain, stepped toward him and asked the question directly. Had he helped the Ji that morning? Before anyone could breathe, Song's eyes snapped open. His expression darkened instantly, as if being awakened into a fight. His voice, low but sharp, cut through the air. He asked Shin what exactly he meant. Shin hesitated, then repeated his question, demanding to know if it was truly Song who helped the G earlier. But by now, the scene had shifted. Song noticed the G standing stiff and uneasy nearby, and Ji-young not far away, still bruised. He looked around, assessing the weight of the moment, and replied calmly, "Yes, he helped her." That single sentence sent a jolt through the room. But Shin wasn't ready to back down just yet. He called it a light, perhaps, a cover for someone else. That was a mistake. Without warning, Song stood and grabbed Shin's wrist, his grip tightening like a vice. The pain hit immediately. Shin's expression twisted in panic as his bravado dissolved under Song's crushing grip. No words were needed. Song's silent anger was far more dangerous than any threat. Within moments, Shin backed off and fled. The scene, humiliated. But as he passed by Ji-young, something caught his eye. A memory. The figure who had thrown the stones at him earlier wasn't too different in size from Ji-young. That thought lingered for just a second, till he saw something glinting. The ring. The one Ji-young had lost. It was now on Shin's hand. Ji-young saw it too. His breath caught. That ring was irreplaceably. It belonged to his family, a symbol of his bloodline, and a gift from his uncle Gai-sang. It wasn't just jewelry. It was a weight of legacy. Conflicted. Ji-young turned to the Ji and Song and thanked them. Without their intervention, things might have gone far worse. But as grateful as he was, anxiety gnawed at him. His uncle's ring, his only physical connection to his father, was in the hands of the enemy. That night, Ji-young returned home, bruised, sore, and silent. The moment he stepped through the mansion gates, the staff froze. The young master, the heir of the household, had returned battered. Whispers quickly turned into a chorus of alarm. Guards clenched their fists, ready to act. Rage simmered just beneath the surface. News of Ji-young's condition reached Gai-sang, the uncle who had entrusted him with the precious ring. When he heard that the young master had been beaten, his calm shattered. The rage that erupted from him was instant and explosive. He demanded to know who dared lay a hand on his nephew. The others around him barely held him back from immediately storming out to avenge Ji-young, but another elder, Hyung-nim, a fellow uncle, intervened, insisting that they stay calm and listen first. Everyone was summoned to the meeting room, including Ji-young. In the heavy silence of the family's private chamber, Ji-young explained everything. He admitted it was he who had thrown the first stone. The room went silent, then erupted into laughter and pride. Not ridicule, not disappointment, admiration. For them, this wasn't a mistake. This was a sign. The young master had finally taken his first step. Hyung-nim, leaning forward with a sharp gaze, nodded. Ji-young had made a choice, and now it was time to follow through. If he wanted to survive in the world he was stepping into, he needed more than guts. He needed training, not just in deception or attitude, but in combat. Hyung-nim told him plainly, if you want to fight, start where everyone starts, with your fists. Start small, start with someone weaker, and learn. The lesson was brutal, but in this world, their world, it was the only way to gain power, respect, and survival. Ji-young sat quietly in that room, surrounded by men who lived by a different code. Part of him still remembered the boy who greeted people with good morning, but that boy was gone, now buried under bruises, betrayal, and an awakening legacy. And as he looked down at his bruised knuckles and thought of the stolen ring, he realized, this path has no halfway. You go all in or not at all. The meeting room was dimly lit, its heavy wooden tables surrounded by men who once ruled the underground world with bloodied knuckles and silent power. Now, they gathered not for war or negotiation but for Ji-young, the heir of a feared legacy. The boy they once swore to protect, he was no longer a child in their eyes. He had chosen his path. It was time for him to walk it. They spoke with certainty to be bad. You must begin with the weak. That's how power is built. Villains, they said, don't waste time on heroes. They thrive by stepping on those beneath them. Weakness is opportunity. Morality is a chain. If he truly wanted to discard his good boy mask, this was his chance. Ji-young listened, quiet, stiff, his hands curled into fists under the table. The words made his stomach twist. Somewhere deep inside, he still heard the echoes of a younger version of himself saying good morning to everyone in class, helping old ladies cross the street, picking up trash without anyone watching. That version of him, though, had died when he saw Soo-jin laugh in the arms of a delinquent. So he nodded. He agreed, out loud at least. The next morning his steps were slower, his mind was louder. As he prepared for school, Gai-sang, his more serious uncle, the one who'd given him the ring, called out to him. Ji-young flinched, certain the topic would be the ring he'd lost, the ring that was now in Shin's possession. But instead, his uncle simply asked something unrelated. Ji-young exhaled in quiet relief. His lie still safe. On the street, the wind was sharp. The city felt colder now, more distant. As he walked through the same familiar alleyways, he passed someone he used to always help, a frail elderly woman, stooped over, collecting cardboard boxes. Her back was bent, her cart was stuck on a curb. Ji-young slowed, his heart lurched. But the voice of his uncle's returned like a curse. Never help unless there's something in it for you. He gritted his teeth and walked past. He didn't look back, though every step felt like a betrayal. Soon after, he saw another elderly man, this one struggling with plastic bags filled with recyclables. His fingers trembled as he tried to untangle a mess of bottles. Again, Ji-young turned, his head away, and again, a voice inside screamed at him, "Help him, just help him." But he didn't single quotes. He kept walking, farther, colder, harder. Each time he refused to help, a small piece of the good Ji-young was chipped away. But rather than feel powerful, he just felt empty. The world around him blurred as guilt piled on his back like invisible chains. He walked blindly, and only at the last second did he notice the incoming truck that screeched to a halt just inches from his body. The near-death moment snapped him out of his spiral. For a second, he breathed in terror. But instead of backing down, something darker ignited inside him. Recklessness, rage, a need to feel something. He crossed the next street even though the light was red, uncaring about honking cars and shouting drivers. A part of him wanted to be scolded, a part of him wanted to be punished, but what he got instead was worse. He saw Sujin, and she was with Shin again. They weren't arguing, they weren't pretending, they were laughing. Holding hands, smiling like two people in love. Ji-young froze. On the sidewalk, his body still but his insides storming. She once said she wanted to marry a good man, that she couldn't stand bullies, that she hated bad boys. So why him, Shin, the thug, Shin, the liar, Shin, the one who had cheated on her already? What was Ji-young even doing this for? Why had he spent years forcing himself to be kind, polite, helpful if kindness meant nothing to the people he cared about? He clenched his fists. If bad guys are what girls love, then I'll become the worst of them all. Later, as he walked through a side street, he heard familiar sounds. Fear, taunts, the helpless shuffling of feet. He turned and saw a smaller student being cornered. This time, Ji-young didn't hesitate. He walked toward them not to help, but to do what he was now meant to do. But what he saw stunned him. It wasn't a group of boys doing the bullying. It was the Ji and two of her friends. The Ji, the girl he had accidentally saved just a day before. She was smirking, looming over a younger student who was clutching his bag. Wide-eyed and terrified, Ji-young blinked at the Ji, and her friends turned to him, expecting what? A hero, a savior. But Ji-young inhaled. This was the moment. He had to commit. He walked up, slowly, his heart pounding, and looked at the boy. His mouth opened, and through a dry throat and a fake coldness, he said, "Give me your money, or I'll kill you." His voice cracked, his face trembled. But he said it. The boy froze. The girl stared in disbelief, and Ji-young stood there, unsure if he had crossed a line or stepped onto the right path. Every instinct in his body screamed that this wasn't him, that this wasn't how his story was supposed to go. But he stayed, still, wearing the mask of a villain, because in this new world he was creating for himself, there was no turning back.